If I could restart our committee, we're on our second current petition, which is PE01508 by Clerkin on ATOS as a sponsor for the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Members have a note by the clerk, the spice briefing and the petition. Could I welcome our petitioner? Good morning, Mr Clerkin. I'm glad you've come along today. And Iain MacInnes, who's the Secretary of Glasgow Against ATOS, to the meeting. Before inviting Mr Clerkin to speak for around 5 minutes, perhaps could I just clarify for the record that the petition obviously raises a matter of legitimate public debate. However, as convener, one of my duties will be to ensure that today's evidence session does not stray into irrelevant matters, and this committee is not used as a forum for making gratuitous remarks. That would be judgment for me, and I would ask all round the table to conduct discussions in an appropriate way and to ensure that discussion centres around the subject matter of the petition and does not stray into issues that are not directly relevant to the petition. And can I now invite Mr Clerkin to make a short presentation of around 5 minutes.
Mr Chairman. Essentially, we are here today to state the facts that 600,000 disabled and sick people in Britain and 60,000 disabled and sick people in Scotland have had their sickness and disability benefits taken off them by ATOS through the operation of the Work Capability Assessment. In addition, 2,200 people have actually died going through the ATOS-administered assessment process. The fact of the matter is these people have either committed suicide, having lost their benefits, or people who were terminally ill and past fit to work who died before going back to work. We speak for these victims today. People like David Barr, who committed suicide, threw himself off the Forth Road Bridge, Eleanor Tatton, who essentially died of a brain tumour 5 weeks after she was past fit to work, Edward Jakes, Jacqueline Harris and Ian Hodges. And above all, may I say, one of the worst cases I have seen was the case of Mark Wood. Mark Wood lived, I should say, in David Cameron's constituency down in Oxford. He was found dead by the police, weighing 5 stone. He'd starved to death. He'd been taken off his benefits by ATOS last year, and he starved to death. And basically, it was found he weighed 5 stones exactly on his death. That's what they found. The fact of the matter is that we believe that ATOS are contract killers. ATOS have profiteered from the misery and suffering of the most poor and vulnerable members of our society. They've not paid a single penny in corporation tax. Truly, we believe that ATOS, setting the scene for this, that ATOS have been financially raping the poor and the vulnerable. That's what they've done. They're going to denigrate our Commonwealth Games if they're allowed to be a sponsor, because they are a toxic brand for many people in Scotland. Can I just finish my presentation?
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, Mr Clerkin.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, we understand the strength of your views on this issue, but you recall my comments at the start. Can we just be conscious of sort of the use of language in the debate?
Okay, I understand that.
Thank you.
The people of Scotland people of Scotland prize their social-democratic beliefs of fairness and social justice. And public opinion in Scotland is appalled at the fact of what ATOS have been doing to people. And they are certainly not in favour of ATOS being a sponsor of the Commonwealth Games. That's been shown, public opinion on these issues, by the Daily Record, who have ran a campaign on ATOS and the harm that they've done to people and the lives they've ruined. They've chronicled it no end over the last 2 years. So what we are saying is that Scottish public opinion is clearly saying to us that ATOS should be dropped as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games so that they don't profiteer from what they've done, because they're going in front of an audience of 1.2 billion people at the Commonwealth Games, and they think that they can profiteer from that. And I don't think it's right or fair that they are allowed to do that, given the harm and the terrible things they've done to the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society. In conclusion, what I'm saying is that they are a toxic brand. They are, and I do repeat the word, they are, as many people have stated in Parliament and elsewhere, they are contract killers. and they are corporate criminals. And as far as we are concerned, they're not fit to grace our Commonwealth Games, and we, the moral conscience of Scotland, demand that our elected representatives do the right thing, that this committee goes forward and urges the Scottish Parliament to contact the Organising Committee to get ATOS dropped as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games, because they're not fit to grace our Commonwealth Games, because they'll forever tarnish the Commonwealth Games if they're allowed to be a sponsor.
Thank you, Mr Clerkin. I would also encourage Mr MacInnes, if you wish to come in, just catch my eye during our question and answer session. I suppose a couple of introductory remarks, Mr Clerkin, before I invite my colleagues to come in. Clearly, I would pick up a sort of consensus on one issue, which is that I think across Scotland there's widespread support for having Glasgow 14. It was a great victory getting Commonwealth Games to Glasgow and indeed for the whole of Scotland. The second point, and this, some of the press reports I've picked up from government ministers and others have made the point that whilst not condoning in any way the issue of welfare reforms that you've pointed out earlier, that the work that ATOS is doing for DWP is completely separate to the work that's being carried out if they are a sponsor in the 2014 Games. What would your response to that comment be?
ATOS are basically in a £500 million contract with the Westminster Government, as you rightly say, but it is clearly linked. They are an entity and they're profiteering on the misery and the suffering of hundreds of thousands of people across the UK, and you cannot divorce the Commonwealth Games from this company and what they have done, what they've carried out. It's morally wrong that they be a sponsor. They're an entity that is basically profiteers, as I say, from the misery of hundreds of thousands of people. We're speaking on their behalf today, and we're saying they are not fit to grace the Commonwealth Games because they'll tarnish the Commonwealth Games' reputation because of the reputation that goes before them.
MacInnes?
Am I switched on here?
Yes, yeah, it's automatic, just if you just speak, yes.
Well, could I just further develop the point that has just been made by saying that ATOS Healthcare, ATOS IT, they're all part of the same group. And in regard to the healthcare aspect, in relation to this question of assessment, work capability assessments, that is not done in any way, shape or form in a way that could be regarded as healthcare. Disability groups and their champions have for decades campaigned to be part of the workforce, to be seen as fully part of society, with their particular barriers taken into account so that these barriers ceased as far as possible to exist. And in other ways we've seen attempts to deal with this. We have the Paralympics, for example, and the Winter Paralympics, which have just completed at the moment. But what do we see with ATOS Healthcare and its relationship with DWP? Well, what we see there is an arithmetic formula, not attention to healthcare or assistance to people with recent healthcare difficulties or who have particular disabilities, to be assisted towards work or some sort of work programme that would lead to a real job at a later stage. That is not what was happening here. That is not what David Freud was contracted to do when he was contracted by a previous Labour government before being employed by the current coalition government. He was contracted to cut the numbers. And an arithmetic formula would cut the numbers. And therefore, it's quite obvious, backing up what my colleague has just said, that they are not separate. IT companies work with numbers. This so-called healthcare arm of the organisation is still working with numbers. Numbers only, not healthcare. And with further evidence can be produced to back that up.
With that, I'll try and allow as much time as I can to allow my other colleagues to come in. Can I throw on to questions from my colleagues? John Wilson?
No questions at the present moment.
Thank you. Jackson Carlow?
No questions.
Right. David Torrance? Chip Brodie?
No questions.
Right. I think clearly as you probably picked up in the previous petition that we had, our job then is to make sure then that we seek information from as many organisations that have a role in the locus. Clearly, the first one, the obvious one, would be the Glasgow 2014 Organising Committee. Obviously, the Scottish Government, the STUC, which has had a track record, as you know, on this particular issue, Glasgow City Council, Scottish Disability Sport and ATOS itself. I think certainly these would seem to me to be the obvious next steps for us. Can I just ask the committee's approval for that? Jackson Carlo?
So I would ask that we write to the DWP as well.
So, Mr MacInnes?
Yes, that is that there are a plethora of small, medium-sized and large organisations supporting people with disabilities and people with health problems who have shown their opposition to ATOS and its activities, and basically to the policy that ATOS are the front people for. And I think we are indebted to these people, and I think that should be noted for the record. And I just wanted to mention that, and also to say that if required, we would be happy to provide an information pack citing some of these people and giving more written evidence if you require it.
Certainly, Mr MacInnes, if you have further information, again, if you could give that to the clerks, the more information we have on this petition, any other petitions, very helpful indeed. I did also flag up that we were going to write to Scottish Disability Sport, which should hopefully pick up some of the issues that you're...
Could I just say that why we put the petition in is because the fact is that we would like the Petitions Committee to actually take forward to take to the Scottish Parliament to call on the Organising Committee for ATOS to step down as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games. That's why we're here today, and that's what we're calling upon. And the fact of the matter is, these hundreds of thousands of people that have suffered, it cannot be divorced from ATOS that's at the Commonwealth Games, and the issue is clearly linked. The STUC, who you quoted, the Scottish Trade Union Congress, voted last year to have ATOS dropped out, to be dropped as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games. There's a whole host of organisations that have voted for ATOS to be stood down as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games, and that includes the STUC, amongst many other trade unions and organisations. And I find it slightly disappointing that some of our MSPs this morning have deemed not to ask any questions or to make any points with regard to this petition. I find that very disappointing.
Well, just to be clear on the next steps, what our normal course of events is we would write to an organisation asking for their advice. Obviously, the Scottish Government is a traditional one because it tends to be around issues that are devolved. So our next steps is to write to all these organisations, and our question will be, what are your views on the nature of this petition? What are your views on the petition that you've lodged today? And that's our normal course of action on petitions. So, you know, we're taking this petition forward, we're raising it with these organisations, so the petition will be continued, and obviously once we get feedback from these organisations, we will keep you actively involved with what the results of that feedback is, because that's what a petition is about. And we appreciate the fact that you're able to come along today and put your strong views to it. There's nothing wrong with having strong views. I think you have made your views very strongly and very clear today. So that's my recommendation, that we write to all these organisations. Can I ask John Wilson? Your views?
Thank you, Convener. And I'm not going to respond to Mr Clerkin's comment there about what MSPs should and shouldn't do in relation to petitions. But could I suggest we write to Sports Scotland as well? Because I think there is a wider issue here. And I know Mr Clerkin has raised the issue of ATOS sponsorship, but I think it's a much wider issue, and that is about private companies sponsoring sporting events. And I know that the ATOS issue is particularly relevant in relation to the work that they are doing on behalf of the DWP in relation to work assessments for individuals. But I think there is a much wider issue here in terms of the issue of sponsorship of sporting events, but taking on board that the major sporting event later this year is the Commonwealth Games. I think it is only but right, when we write to organisations that have been named today, that we get responses from them before the petition then can take it forward. But I think in the first instance, by writing to those organisations, allows us to get their responses, their views, and for us to make a determined decision beyond that.
Thank you. Are committee members agreeable in that course of events that I have described in terms of various organisations we've dragged to? Yeah. Right. Thank you for that. So as you can hear, Mr Clerkin and Mr MacInnes, we are taking your petition forward. We're writing to a whole series of organisations. Just on the issue for DWP, we'll be writing to them about, obviously this is a focus particularly about the Commonwealth Games, which is not a locus for DWP, but we'll be asking them what their views on this petition are. I think that is relevant. I think comes Jackson Carlin's point. Can I just hear Mr.
Yes, and also I would have thought their comment on some of the evidence we've heard, because obviously a number of figures were asserted, which obviously the DWP would have a view and be able to comment upon.
So I think what Mr Carroll is suggesting is not just a petition, but we will send a copy of the official record to ask for any comments of the points that have been made during that. Mr Wilson? Right. Thank you. So just to summarise then, we are continuing your petition. We will actively keep you up to date. We will write to all these organisations, and when we've got feedback, we'll look at this petition again in the future. And clearly, you'll be welcome to be in the gallery at that stage, both Mr Clerkin and Mr MacInnes. And can I thank you both for coming along and for putting your comments very quickly, because I'm a bit short of time.
It's just to say that there is a sort of Kafkaesque situation whereby we are sitting here and not the people who are most directly affected, because these people are living in fear of losing the small amount of money that they have to live on. And therefore they are very often, they will give the likes of us information and say, don't use my name.
And I do appreciate that you're saying us for information. Some of it will be anonymised, and I appreciate that as well. And can I thank both of you for coming along and your colleagues in the gallery today, and I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow our witnesses to leave. Thank you both.